book, My Darling Husband. Before we get started, a few virtual housekeeping items. All of our audience members are on mute. If you have any issues during the presentation or would like to submit a question for Kimberly, please use the chat function. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end, and I'll present your questions to Kimberly at that time.
Must be my phone.
Also, we suggest that you change your screen view from gallery view to speaker so that you see whoever's speaking on the large screen rather than all of the audience members at once. Atlanta Authors has been holding author events at the Roswell Library and virtually for the last 14 years, and the list of authors is impressive. I think we have a slide that's going to show that. Oh, yeah. This is our 9th virtual event, and we appreciate your attendance. These days, bookstores, libraries, authors, and publishers need our support more than ever. Thanks to you all for being here today to help Atlanta authors keep the literary world alive and well in our future, and our children's and grandchildren's future. I also want to thank the Atlanta Authors Committee members, which include Marilyn Barron, Judy Stanton, Lou Conti, Deanna Smith, George Weinstein from the Atlanta Writers Club, and the owner of our favorite local bookstore, the Book Miser herself, Annelle Gerson. Do we have a slide for that? We also want to thank the Friends of the Roswell and East Roswell Libraries for their unwavering support. We work in association with Roswell Reads, who have kept their program alive and growing for more than 16 years. Signed copies of Kimberly's book, My Darling Husband, will be available for purchase at Book Miser at a 20% discount on the cover price. Book Miser is located at 3822 Roswell Road, less than a 10-minute drive from most areas of Roswell. You can also go to their website, bookmiser.net, for more information. And I'll also add that information in the chat area. I think it's already there of your screen, so you can find it there as well. Now I'd like to introduce Annelle Gerson, the owner of Book Miser, who will introduce today's author.
Well, thank you, Grace, and thank you, attendees, for joining us today. It is truly my honor to introduce you to an author whom I feel is Atlanta's queen of, wow, I didn't see that coming plots. Originally from Kingsport, Tennessee, Kimberly Belle relocated to Atlanta to attend Agnes Scott College, where she subsequently earned her BA. It was also in Atlanta where she met a certain Dutchman who she likes to say swept her off her feet and who became her husband. Consequently, she now speaks fluent Dutch and splits her time between Atlanta and the Netherlands. Although right now I think she'll tell you she's in the Caribbean, so how fun is that? Full of ambition and heart, after college, Kimberly worked in marketing and fundraising for Habitat for Humanity, the YMCA, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and the United Way. And eventually, she turned to writing. Again, in Atlanta, during a Romance Writers of America conference, which included a sort of speed dating, pitch interview process with agents, Kimberly met her agent, and the rest, as they say, is history. Author now of 7 books, her novels have been optioned for film and television and translated into a dozen languages. They include the 2014 release of The Last Breath, The Ones We Trust, released in 2015. 2016, she published The Marriage Lie, which was a USA Today, a Wall Street Journal, and the Globe and Mail bestseller, as well as #1 on iTunes in the UK. And it was also a semi-finalist in the 2017 Goodreads Choice Awards for Best Mystery and Thriller. 3 Days Missing came out in 2018. Dear Wife was released in 2019. Stranger in the Lake in 2020. And Book 7, and the book we celebrate today, My Darling Husband, was published in 2021 and was recently selected as a Library Reads pick. To quote Publisher Weekly's review of My Darling Husband, several well-placed twists deliciously shake up the brisk plot. Belle knows how to keep the pages turning. Atlanta's own Jocelyn Jackson says, riveting suspense, truly surprising revelations, and silky smooth writing make this one unmissable. I couldn't agree more. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a virtual welcome to Kimberly Belle.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks everyone for being here. Can't wait to talk about this book.
And I can't wait to ask you about 100 questions about it. So let's start. Can you start a little bit by just telling us a little bit about the book, about My Darling Husband, the plot, the characters, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the story, the specifics of the story and the characters.
Perfect. So My Darling Husband is the story of a woman named Jade, and she is a stay-at-home mother. She has 2 kids, a 7-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl who is a violin prodigy. So she's really smart and really maybe a little too smart sometimes. And she is coming home one day in Atlanta with the 2 kids on the back seat, and in all the chaos of getting them out of the car, and they're arguing and throwing things and whatever, and all the chaos, she doesn't notice the man in the corner of the garage standing in the shadows, and he's wearing a mask and has a gun, and he basically forces his way into the home and holds Jade and her 2 children for ransom. He forces her to call her husband and demands a crazy amount of money, like $734,296, something very specific and very large, and gives her husband Cam, who is a restaurateur in Atlanta, like 3 hours to pull that money together, which if you've ever tried to deduct a big sum of money from your bank, is mission impossible at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we see Cam racing around town, trying to pull together this crazy big sum of money, and then Jade in the home with the 2 kids trying to keep herself alive and protect them while they wait to see if her husband's going to be able to pull together the money.
Right. Wow. And so I'm glad you talked about the ransom amount, because $734,296. I mean, $734,000. That's a very specific number.
Yeah.
Where did that come from, and why that number?
Well, I can't really tell you where that particular number came from, because that would give away a big part of the plot. But the idea for a specific amount came from a real home invasion story in Atlanta. And it's people that they're not really friends of ours, but they're kind of on the edges of our social circle. But in their case, it came from they had pulled a bank statement out of the mailbox. So lesson number 1, lock your mailboxes. Don't let your bank send the statements on paper into your mailbox, because that is a common trick, unfortunately. But what I liked about that detail, and what I use in the story, is it automatically suggests that this kidnapper, his name is Sebastian, that Sebastian knows more about this family than he's telling. And I really like the way that played, because then the reader is kind of in on something, but they don't quite know what yet. And that's part of the plot. We find out what that money, how he came to that amount, and what it's for.
Right. And there are probably fewer things scarier than being a victim of a crime than knowing that you're a victim and it's not random. Like, it's already scary enough to be a victim of a crime. But then when you realize this is personal, right? That takes
Yes.
on another level. Um,
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about some of the characters in the story, right? Let's talk about the kids. Beatrix manages to be quite a foil against the intruder, escaping twice, and she's also a prodigy violinist. Is Beatrix based on anybody?
No, not really. I just wanted a kid who was going to be maybe a little too smart for her britches. And so, I came up with the violin angle just because and the more that I researched into that, the more I found like those are really smart kids typically. They're not just crazy talented, they're crazy smart, and their brains sometimes work a little differently than other kids. And so, for a story like this, when Jade is basically tied to a chair across the hall, separated from her kids, and she wants her kids to be brave, but she doesn't want them to be too brave and be too reckless, So I like the way it gave the story that extra tension. Because you don't know you know what she's capable of. You hope that she doesn't do it all, and that she's safe when she's, taking these big risks.
Right.
Because like you said, she gets away twice, and yeah, and that kind of, heightens the tension in the story for sure.
And since let's talk about Jade and her, her goal is to protect her children from harm. And she's really clever in how she goes about that. But then she's also she's not looking for a white knight to save her either, right? So
Right.
tell us a little bit more about Jade, your inspiration for her, and how much your own experience as a mother, informed that character.
Yeah, I get asked this a lot because I do have not all my stories, but often in my stories, there are kids. And I have two kids, but mine are big and grown. I don't know if I could have written this kind of story when they were 7 and 9. That would have been maybe a little too close to home. But now that mine are, out of the house and taking care of themselves, I can write these kind of stories with kids in it because I really like I said, that it adds an extra dimension to the story. And I forgot your question. Sorry.
Oh, like what as a mom, like what inspired you to write Jade the way you did? And
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact that she's not just waiting for someone to save her. She has an active
Right.
saving herself.
Yes. And that is something that I do in all my stories, that I typically like writing about women who are strong and brave in ways that they don't quite realize when the story opens. And then they're put in this situation where they have to summon all their courage and summon all um, their smarts really to save themselves. And that's often when I write these stories, and all my main characters have been women thus far. I mean, I do have some main character or head characters as well, but my stories usually center around a woman. But they're all it's always part of their character arc is that they're realizing how strong they are, and that they may love their husband, but they don't necessarily need him to come in, like you said, on a white horse and save them, that they're often very capable of doing these things themselves as well.
Right. And as you said, you do write domestic suspense. You write a lot about marriage. And My Darling Husband in particular seems to center more around family than maybe some of your earlier titles. So talk a little bit about that for us, about why this genre speaks to you so much, why you do talk about marriage so much, why trust is such an important almost character, right, in your stories, because we're dealing with marriage dynamics and family dynamics. So talk a little bit about that, please.
Right. So I love the domestic suspense genre because they are such recognizable relationships, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be husband wife. It can also be, father or mother son, mother daughter, whatever. And I've done a couple of those as well, but I do keep coming back to the marriage angle just because it is such a recognizable. I think everybody, even if you're not married, can kind of put yourself into you know what a marriage entails, right? And what that means in terms of trust and sharing your life with a person, and really thinking that you know this person. You're sleeping beside them at night for however many years every night. And so when there's a betrayal of some kind, or a lie or a secret, that hits really, really hard. And I think it's automatically a premise that a lot of people can put themselves in and kind of imagine themselves like, oh gosh, if this happened to me, what would I do? How would I respond? And, like I said before, I kind of write about these normal, everyday women who find themselves in these extraordinary circumstances. And I think for me, it's fascinating to write about and to come up with these, scenarios, and to figure out how they're going to get themselves out of these scenarios in a safe and healthy and whole pieces, all body pieces still attached kind of way. And also, what that means for the relationship and for the family. And, as I move forward with my novels, it's funny that you bring up the family thing, because I've had one other book with some kids in it, and that's really kind of it. But the stories that are coming to me now are typically more family oriented. Maybe it's like I said, that my kids are big and grown and safe now, and I can write these stories. But it's also, I don't know, it's kind of the direction I'm moving in, because I do like the added dimension it gives. It's not just the husband and wife that the suspense story plot line affects. It's the whole family.
Right. Let me check the chat now and ask a question. Okay, here's a question from one of the participants. I really like the way you bring the daughter into the story, first as an annoying brat and ultimately as a hero in the story. Is this what you mean by multidimensional characters?
Yeah, I think so. And I do actually really enjoy doing that with not always my main characters. Main characters are maybe a little bit harder to do that with, but especially side characters, important side characters, that you present them in one way, and then they become, over the course of the story, a very different, the reader at least has a very different view of them. And I think Beatrix was a fun one to do it with, because you're right. She kind of starts out bratty, maybe a little bratty. She's, 9. I don't know if anybody out there has had a 9-year-old girl, but boy, they can be difficult. So, I definitely mind that for this story. And, like I said, she's maybe a little too smart for her britches sometimes. And I use that as well. But she was also such a fun character to write, because she was so brave, and because she did these really daring things. I mean, or she could have just stayed, stuck to the chair and waited for her dad to come to save her, but she wasn't going to do that. And I love that about her.
When you talk about that, her being fun to write, are there any characters that haven't been fun for you to write? Like, you've created someone who resonates in some way or another, but you don't like them as much as the readers won't like them, or you're ambiguous about them. Is there any do you remember any of the characters that did that for you?
I don't think in this story. I think in this, well, maybe the neighbor across the street. Now I've blanked on her name. I needed her in the story. She was not she was kind of snotty. She was, so I don't know if she was hard to write, but she was not as much fun as some of the others. But what I loved writing, for example, Sebastian, the villain in this, because I think he's also one of those characters that you start out as the reader thinking, he's this horrible, awful guy, right? He's got a gun aimed at a couple of kids, and he's wearing a mask, and he's scaring the pants off of everybody. But as the story progresses, we learn that he's backed into a corner. And I'm trying not to give away too much, so I'm being very vague, I know, but he's really backed into a corner, and he sees this as his only way out.
Right.
And I think by the end of the story, I hope by the end of the story, readers have gotten some sympathy for him and his predicament, even if they don't agree with the way that he's going about getting what he wants and needs.
Right.
Um,
And I think, I mean, I think a character like that is much more realistic than,
mhm,
sort of, this stereotypical bad guy with a scar right down the middle of his face that, has no redeeming qualities or
right,
nothing to really go for except evil,
right.
right? I think it's nuanced, and the person who asked the question talked about a multidimensional character, and I
Mhm,
think your antagonist is one
yeah,
of those characters.
yeah.
I, on a sort of broader note, let's talk a little bit about the restaurant, the Atlanta restaurant scene, and the role it plays in your story. Of course, Atlanta is known for great restaurants, right, and great food. And I like that Cam's a celebrity chef and owner. Talk a little bit about his character and his portrayal, and why you chose that profession for him, and um, do you love Atlanta dining as much as the rest of us probably do, and do you have a favorite? So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about like the
Yeah,
foodie part of the book.
yeah. Well, so when I started this story, I wanted Cam to have a very visible profession.
Mhm.
And I also started this story in the spring of 2020, which I don't know what you guys were doing in like March, April of 2020, but I was stuck at home and reading all sorts of articles about how restaurants were going belly up. And so it just kind of, maybe that planted a seed in my head a little bit. But we also, my husband and I are also friends, more my husband's friend, but with Kevin Rathbun, who I'm sure if anybody in Atlanta, everybody in Atlanta knows, right?
Yeah.
And so I know from Kevin does very well. But I know from him what it's like, first of all, to go to a restaurant with him. It's like walking in with a rock star. And I think Jade actually says that in the book somewhere, going anywhere with him is like coming in with a rock star. Everybody wants pictures. They want to talk to you. They want to, if you go to a restaurant, they send over drinks and food. And I mean, it's just a very, very visible role in the city. And also a role where people think probably that you have a lot of money, which, maybe $734,296 lying around somewhere, So that's why I chose restaurants. And in my very first version, I actually did use the pandemic as part of why he was maybe struggling. His restaurants were maybe struggling, and my agent was like, too soon, take it out. So I rewound that part, but I did give him, he's got, I can't remember exactly, 4, maybe 5 restaurants running in Atlanta, and he's expanded really quickly, maybe too quickly. He's taken on some investors, which, I also know from Kevin that you have to be super careful with investors, because
Right.
when you take, they give you money, but then you owe them. So, he's maybe done it a little too quickly. He's maybe, maybe sought out the whole, he puts, I think, more importance on the whole money status, all that stuff, than Jade does. So it makes him a really visible target
Right, right.
going in.
So do you have a favorite restaurant in Atlanta?
Well, I have to say KR Steak Bar, right? I have lots of favorite restaurants, so many great ones. We end up a lot at the Buckhead restaurants, just because, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's close by, and yeah.
Um, so I know like some writers start going, and we talked a little bit about this before we went live, about how difficult it is to write. For some people, I guess it's not difficult, but how complex it is to write suspense and thrillers. Um, did you know the end of this before you started? Is that usually how you go about writing?
Yeah. So I'm typically under contract for multiple books at a time, and not all of them are defined. It's just, your next book is due on this date. So when it's time for me to think about what my next story is going to be, I have to pitch to my editor. And I do that usually with, first I'll give her like, a paragraph of like, this is what I'm thinking. And then once we agree on my premise, I come up with a full entire outline, and she approves that as well, and puts her fingers in the pie. Yeah, so when I sit down to write, I have a full outline, and I mean chapter by chapter. Sometimes it's 15, 20 pages of an outline.
Okay.
So it's
And
pretty
do you
detailed.
deviate from that a lot, or is it pretty, are your outlines so tight that once you get going, you stick to it?
I mean, I have never changed an ending.
Wow.
So I stick with it. Sometimes when you're writing, things might like get bumped around, moved around sometimes, especially when you're going back and forth with multiple points of view, like I do with this particular book. But hardly ever like major changes. I will say though, in The Marriage Light, I did have a character that was not in my outline, and he walked into a scene, and he was actually one of my main characters, and he walked into a scene. I was like, who are you and what are you doing here? But I just kind of went with it, and it turned out, he was a really important part of the story. So I give myself room, but I have bumpers on either side in terms of my outline. But you were talking before about how it's difficult to write a complicated story and keep track of everything, and that's why I have an outline too. It's for me, it's really a roadmap, and I don't know how I would do it without it, because there's so many moving pieces, and especially when you're doing multiple storylines, like Cam's running around town and then Jade's in the house, and I just my brain works better with an outline and a roadmap.
Do you ever play your scenes out? Like, do you ever like jump in the car and do like a driver list, or do you know Atlanta well enough that you don't have to do that at this point?
Yeah, that's actually why I love setting books in Atlanta, is that I don't have to do a lot of that, research into, how long is it going to take me to drive from Midtown to Vinings at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, I kind of know that it's going to be a nightmare.
Well, that's about 4 hours, right?
Right. So yeah. So, and I get to use some of my favorite, spots in Atlanta. I put things at the Botanical Gardens in Piedmont Park. I've done the Beltline. I get to use some of my favorite landmarks and restaurants and real things, which I just love. And Atlanta readers love that too. I hear a lot from.
Have any of the owners of these establishments ever, like, are they fans? Have they read your books? Have they ever talked to you about being in your books? Because that seems like that would be fun.
Yeah. Well, I've used Kevin a couple times. He knows that. Trying to think what else. Oh yeah. One of the South African restaurant in Buckhead, they're friends of ours as well. So I've put them in there as well. Yeah.
That's really,
I love doing that.
You touched on this a little bit, but as you said, in early 2020, we were pretty much all kind of in the same boat. So how is your writing process? Like, how have you had to alter it over the past couple of years, and what's different, if anything, about, I mean, obviously you're still using outlines, but what's different about that? And you touched on, your agent saying, oh, it's too early, it's too soon to, but like, do you ever see a time where you would put like, the pandemic in any of your storylines, and you don't know yet?
Yeah, I don't know. You see, it's starting to happen, but I'm glad she made me take it out, because I'm not ready for it yet. I mean, I think we're still too much in the thick of it. Maybe in a couple of years, once that's like, kind of a bad dream that we've put behind us. But I think fiction, we're going to leave it just no pandemic for now. what was your other question?
Your process.
Oh, the process. So My Darling Husband was actually the fastest I've ever written a book. And I think it is because of exactly, those early days of the pandemic. We were stuck in our homes. I mean, we were going nowhere, right? We were ordering groceries and then spraying them down on the front stoop. And I mean, we were really, really hunkered down. At least my family was. And my daughter was home from college. She at the time she was in college in New York City, which was, she was like, get me out of here. So for me, it was partly that, I had all the other distractions fell away. It was also a welcome distraction for me to dive into this story, because then I didn't have to think about all the horrible, awful things that were going on outside our home. And then I used some of the uncertainty and tension and fear and all those emotions. I kind of just poured those into the page, and it flew out of me in a way that a story has never done before. I wish I could make it happen every time because the story that I just turned in took me 10 months, so, and this one was
Darling,
4.
you did that in 4 months?
4 months. I mean, it wasn't done, but my first
but-
solid draft that I turned in was a 4-month thing, which, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever be able to recreate that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Touching on that, someone's asked, so because you do seem like you travel a lot, is it hard for you to write on the road, and do you take vacations from writing, or do you bring it with you?
I bring it with me pretty much everywhere. And it's actually easier for me to write on the road. I don't know why that is. I think there's something about, not having to work on, the groceries and all those chores that you have in your own home. When you're in a hotel or when you're, traveling, whatever, it's a lot of that falls away. So I can get big chunks of, writing done in a day. When we're in Amsterdam, I have a great spot there and I get a lot done there. I think it's a combination of just what I said and just being somewhere different and new. I don't know, for some reason it fires up my brain. And that's the great thing about this job is I can do it anywhere. It's awesome.
One of the questions I forgot to ask you when we were talking specifics about the story and the themes of the story is about, secrets in marriage, right? Because that's huge in this one. Talk to me a little bit about what you think the book says about secrets in marriage.
So, I think every marriage has its secrets. I think that you probably can't get around that. And I think that some secrets in a marriage are okay. I think what this book does is kind of look at, where's the line? At what point do you draw the line? And when a secret, a secret can actually come back and do some damage if you're not careful sometimes. And that's exactly what happens in this story. But I also think that this story, at least this is what I hope the story does, especially towards the ending, is, having your life and your children's lives put in danger also puts things into perspective. And so maybe it's a little easier to forgive those secrets and transgressions when you've survived, and so I hope it has people thinking about those things and maybe looking to their own, relationships and thinking about, where would I draw the line in my relationship? And I think it's kind of a moving target too, often, and especially in a story like this.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you have on the horizon in writing, or are these things top secret, or can you share a little bit with us today?
Top secret. So my next book, which I think will be around this time next year, I'm guessing, is called The Personal Assistant. And it is about a Instagram influencer who is really big, also Atlanta story setting. She posts something maybe a little carelessly, and it goes viral, but in a really bad way. And she's getting canceled and people are freaking out and it's turning into this whole, circus. And right in the midst of this, her personal assistant goes missing. And it looks like maybe her personal assistant might have been behind the post and may have some things that she's not exactly telling as well. And of course, with all the stress, this is a married mother of two girl twins. So the family, all sorts of cracks start happening in her marriage and with the family and the kids. So it just kind of goes from there.
That sounds amazing. Where do you get your ideas from for the stories?
This one, it was probably my fourth or fifth pitch, because the first couple that I pitched were getting shot down, and that happens a lot, actually. Same with My Darling Husband. That was another one that took us a bunch of times to land on the right story. But it's really, sometimes ideas just fall into my head. Dear Wife was one that came to me fully formed, like plopped in my head in the middle of the night. And I called up my editor and I was like, throw away all the other pitches. This is the story I'm writing. But normally it is a lot of brainstorming and a lot of thinking. And, my editor is good about it too, because she typically has a wish list. And so I'll say, okay, what are you thinking? Like, what would you like to see from me? Give me some parameters, maybe some, one sentence, that you're looking for, and then I'll see what I can come up around it.
Wow, that's great. And then I have a fun question for you. I think these have all been fun for me anyway, but so I love what you say on your website, that home is where your laptop is, right? Where the laptop is. So, and you divide your time between Amsterdam and Atlanta when you're not in the Caribbean. So when you're in Amsterdam, what do you miss about Atlanta? And when you're in Atlanta, what do you miss about Amsterdam?
So when I am in Amsterdam, what I miss about Atlanta is typically the weather, although, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Amsterdam, but it's typically, it's a sea climate. It's very northern. I think it's like up in, same, what is that? Latitude, longitude? I never remember. Latitude as somewhere up in Canada. So it's, it's pretty up north. It is often wet and windy and chilly. Even in the summer, it can, if they have 80 degrees, that's hot days. So I miss sometimes the sunshine and the, just knowing in Atlanta, like if it rains 15 minutes later, it'll be done. Right. And in Holland, it can go on for weeks and weeks. Mm-hmm. What I miss when I'm in Atlanta about Amsterdam. So we have our place is like in the middle of Amsterdam, and I walk outside and I'm never in a car, ever in a car. It's on a bike. I'm walking. There's, great public transportation. So you can actually get all over Europe with public transportation, which is amazing. So I really miss that when I'm in Atlanta. That, even though we're in town, but there's really not that much walkable stuff in Atlanta, and I really miss that. I don't miss my car at all when we're in Amsterdam. It's great, and we have one of our kids lives there, so when I'm in Atlanta, I miss him in Amsterdam.
Have any of your titles been translated into Dutch?
I wish. Okay, so I am like in all sorts of countries in Europe except for Holland, and I have really tried to work, we know a lot of people in Holland, but I've worked all my contacts, and it hasn't happened yet, but I'm holding out hope.
Yeah.
It's a very small market. You know who's huge in Holland is Karen Slaughter. She actually has her release date is usually first in Holland before it is US, because she's so huge, and she shoots straight to the top. She goes on tour there.
Is it the gore and the violence? Is that what it is?
I think they love the dark thrillery stuff. They just really love that. And her books, speak to that a lot if you're Karen Slaughter fans, which I am. She's
Yeah, we talked
amazing.
about that. We're both huge fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I said, Holland is a very small market. The domestic suspense is maybe not as hot as the Karen Slaughtery kind of thrillery stuff. So I'll get there one day. I would love it. I would love it.
That would be
It's
amazing.
definitely a bucket list goal of mine, for
Right.
sure.
Yeah, are there any other questions in the chat, Deanna? Okay. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you. I could keep talking to you for hours. And, as a writer too, I love hearing about writing processes. And so I enjoyed that part of the talk too. I would love to, I want to thank you for being here today. And I'd like everybody to give her a round of applause, a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And where did you say you were right now? That's you're in the Caribbean?
Yes, I'm on the island of St. Bart's, which is teeny tiny French island.
Yeah. And you've been working? Are you writing while you're there?
You asked this before and I forgot this part. So I'm actually in between. I turned in my book and I'm waiting for edits, and I have actually had a almost month-long vacation where I have not been writing. I've worked on a couple of pitches for other stuff, but I have not written one scene, and it's been great. And like, lo and behold, that's when the ideas plop in your head. So I have 2 ideas now that I'm,
you just
kind
like
of
jot
thinking.
notes down, like to remind yourself to get back to it when you're back to working?
Oh yeah. I'm writing down all my, thoughts for each idea, for sure.
Wonderful. So I just want to remind everybody that Book Miser will have signed copies of My Darling Husband for purchase. Once again, thank you so much for talking to us today, Kimberly. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to read My Darling Husband.
Thanks for having me.
The next Atlanta Authors event is being finalized, so stay tuned for information about that. Also, hang on 1 second. Yeah, we're getting some information. We'll get you information about that. And then Roswell Reads has just completed their annual One City, One Read event in January, featuring Laura Morelli's Stolen Lady. Their next event will be a virtual book discussion of The Vanishing Half. If you guys haven't read that, it's brilliant, by Britt Bennett on March 8th. Go to roswellreads.com to register. Thanks again to everyone for participating today. And I'm going to stay online for a few minutes and unmute the audience in case anyone has any additional questions or comments for Kimberly. And until the next time, everyone, please be safe.
And you can unmute yourself if you have any comments for Kimberly. And thank you, Kimberly. I loved the book. I loved the little 10-year-old girl, Beatrix. She was my hero in the book. And I don't want to give it away or anything, but she was so annoying in the beginning. And I was like, you need to just shut up or you're going to get yourself shot, by this guy. And then later on, I was like, oh, she was just
Go girl.
Yeah, go girl.
She was fun. Well, thank you.
And one question I had was about technology. Like, you use security cameras and cell phones. And is it hard to incorporate that into a novel?
It's hard just because it changes so quickly. And I try to incorporate it in a way that it doesn't date my novel too much. I mean, I'm sure we've all read the stories now with like the flip phones or the brick phones or whatever, and then you're like, oh, well, that, old news. So, I try to do it in a way that it doesn't outdate my story. But yeah, it's a fun thing to include in a novel. And I actually use it in a lot of my books, not necessarily home security, but, I think in one of my stories, I had like a Snapchat kind of messaging that disappears after however many minutes. And I have some techie friends that I'll call and be like, does this exist? Is this a real thing? And they kind of walk me through it. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun. And readers actually really like that. I hear a lot from readers that they enjoy that part of the story.
Yeah, it adds another dimension to
Mhm.
the story and makes it seem like you're in the story, because of
Mhm.
the, nanny cam stuff and the security cam. It was really a neat aspect of the
Yeah.
story.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for our author before we sign off?
It's great. Really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
And I know we had people from all over the country. We registered for here. We had people from Scotland and Canada. Are any of those people on that want to say hi from another country?
Oh, there's Susan.
Hi, and thank you from Toronto.
Oh,
Great.
Toronto. Yay.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being here.
And even people from Toronto can order books online through the Book Miser website. So I reposted that in our chat area if you want to order a copy or signed copy of the book. Also, I meant to say some more about Grace too. Grace Winter is also a writer, and she's also a writing coach. So you can learn more about Grace Winter at her website, thewriterstation.com. And she is also a very talented writer. Do you want to tell us about yourself, Grace, a little bit?
Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, I work. I'm working on my second novel now. My first was a self-published romance fiction, and I'm currently querying my YA speculative fiction. This is why I had talked to Kimberly a little bit before about how difficult it is and how talented I think thriller writers are, because they have to weave so many things together, and red herrings and hints, and to keep people guessing until the very last minute, right? And so, and I like, why did I choose this genre as my second book is beyond me. But like you said, Kimberly, it just came to me and I ran with it. So I've been actually querying and I've had some good success. I've had some full requests, and, fingers crossed, this is the year that I might, get something. So
I can
yeah.
highly recommend going to conferences once they start those back up, because that is, and Nell said, that's how I met my agent. I pitched to her at Moonlight and Magnolias in
I was a Georgia a Maggie Awards finalist for my first novel. So
that's
yeah, I'm
amazing.
really
Yeah.
familiar with the GRW.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Atlantis Writers Club, of which Grace is a member, also holds an annual Atlanta Writers Conference here in Atlanta. I think it's traditionally held down by the airport, but of course, in recent events, it's been virtual, or recent years, it's been virtual. So we're hoping, I believe, Grace, do you know the details about it this year? I
Yeah,
believe they are going back in person, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they're giving the option virtual or in person. It's a biannual conference. The next one is in May. I think they May and November. And I actually one of the freelance editors that we edit submissions for. But it's a very successful conference, very well attended. I think there's got to be at least a dozen agents involved in this one coming in May. You guys are familiar with Becky Albertelli.
Mm-hmm.
She got her agent from
Yes.
the Atlanta Writers Conference. Yeah, so I mean, George and his team put on they do a great job putting on this conference every year, and so I'm sure this year is going to be just as successful as previous years, and it's in May, and you can find information about that on their website.
Yeah, Atlanta Writers Club or Group? Atlanta Writers
Club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you again. And we did have another Toronto person. Harriet DeCoven says hello from Toronto. And Susan says thanks so much for this and all your terrific events. So thanks everyone for your participation, and we'll see you at our next one. Have fun in the
Everyone,
Caribbean.
bye.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your time, Kimberly. There, you
Yes,
deserve
thanks
it.
for
You need a
taking
break
the
after
time.
writing a book in 4 months.
Amazing.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.